Hey, what's up everybody? It's David here with Tough Guys TV, and on this episode we are building this custom oak washer game set. Now this video is going to cover the entire build process from the rough cut lumber all the way to the finished product. Don't forget to check the links down in the description for tools or inspiration that I had in order to make this game set. But yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. All right, getting started on this one, we have some 1x5 oak boards. Now these are actually about 12 feet long, so I need to cut them down to length. And by the way, when I say 1x5, they are true 1 inch thick. And I actually really liked the fact that they were 1 inch true because these are going to actually serve as the exterior frame of the washer set. And I wanted something to be a little bit more substantial looking, as well as obviously having the sturdiness of a 1 inch board. Now, once I had these cut down to manageable lengths, I needed to rip them, and I didn't want to start by making them any smaller, although I knew later on I probably would not like a full 5 inch height. I just wanted to get them all squared up at 5 inches, so that's what I'm doing here. There was some variability in the height on these things because they're just long, rough cut boards, but I was able to get them all down consistently to 5 inches. I had a little bit of scarring there because, well, my blade was old, and that's why you change your blade. So I had some other pieces that were 3/4 inch thick, and I wanted these to be the inside frame, so I'm ripping those down to 4 inches. Again, that's sort of just a placeholder for now, because that's the height I wanted to go with. Now next up, I'm going to go to the miter saw to just cut these things down to pretty much the lengths that they're going to be for the actual frame. I always leave things a little bit proud so that I can come back and cut my miters and make them more precise later. Now with the boards cut to the lengths that they need to be, I can move over to the router table. I'm starting off with a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch rabbet, and I'm using a router bit in order to do this at the router table. Now, I ended up changing my mind to go with a 3/4 inch thick plywood, some maple that I had left over in the shop that I really like the look of it. So these initial cuts are a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch rabbet. Now, if you were set up for a 1/2 inch piece of plywood, this would be an absolutely perfect way to do this, even with a handheld router. But because I'm going to 3/4 inch, I needed to remove a little bit more material. So here I am kind of trialing error with this straight bit so that I could just get it all the way to 3/4 of an inch. So I just took all of the boards that I had cut and I ran them through to make sure they lined up with the plywood that I chose to use. Now, a great alternative way to do this if you're doing a 3/4 inch rabbet is to use a dado stack at your table saw. If you have one that can do a 3/4 inch cut, then this is a super easy way to make repetitive cuts fast and consistently the exact same for your project. Next up, we moved over to sanding, which I know is everyone's absolute favorite thing to do. Now, I do recommend doing all of your sanding on your cut boards prior to making your miters, as this is going to be a mitered frame. So for the inside and the exterior, I'm just sanding down all the boards and getting them prepped and ready to go prior to applying my miter cuts. Now, as I mentioned before, we went with a 3/4 inch maple plywood. Now, the boards themselves, I'm going for a 15 by 15 inch frame, and so the plywood, I have just rough cut it a little bit bigger than that so that I could lay my pieces onto it and then actually mark the exact size that I needed instead of trying to guess ahead with a table saw and make my cuts and then my plywood just isn't big enough. So with my frame pieces already made, I laid them on my plywood frame in order to mark it down so I could get everything exactly right. Now the next step is I need to lay out where I'm going to put the interior frame on this. So I got out one of the washers, I set it in the center, and then I just did some measurements on what felt right to me. From doing my research online for this project, there really wasn't a set way to build this, so I went with what I liked, which ended up being a 5 inch by 5 inch center frame, and that's the outside diameter. And then I have my exterior frame, of course, is going to be the full size. Then I went ahead and ripped down those boards that I'm using for the interior of the frame to the height that I felt like was going to work, and then I laid the exterior frame next to it so I could mark off and make sure that the exterior frame is the same height as what I wanted for the interior. The interior frame ended up being 3 inches off the deck or the plywood at the bottom of the washer set. That's again the height that I just felt comfortable after doing some tests in the shop. And remembering, of course, the size that you use is up to you. Now, next up, I headed over to the miter station. I made sure I used an inclinometer to check the miter angle, and I actually have my miter saw turned like this in order to cut the miters because, well, my blade is not big enough to stand these boards up and cut them the other way. I actually like cutting when I'm doing repetitive cuts like this. Now, it could, of course, just be the saw that I'm using in particular, but laying the saw over and cutting the miters in this particular way seems to be the best way for me to get consistent cuts. Quick pause so that I could do a dry fit of the larger exterior frame just to make sure everything looked really nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the miters for the interior frame. Now for these, I could leave it the other way, or I could do the miters this way because these boards are actually shorter. They're only 3 inches tall from bottom to top, whereas the other ones were a little bit taller because they had the extra 3/4 inch. And here is that dry fit in. This is not glued yet. I just want to make sure that everything laid out like I liked. Now moving over to the glue up, I used some blue painter's tape to lay onto the pieces after I line them up against the straight side of my level to confirm everything was lined up. And then of course I do a dry fit before I start applying the glue to make sure that everything fits once you turn it into the box that I was making. And for this project we're using Type-On 3. It's a great choice for exterior, especially since this is a game set that's going to get played outside and potentially in the weather if you're at a family cookout or something. So that's why I chose to use Type-On 3 on this. I have used it consistently for exterior projects and it's just worked out great. So now we're going to glue up the larger exterior frame, and for these I'm adding in a couple of these outside corner clamps, and that's because I have the one part that is a little bit thinner where I've done the rabbet. And by the way, I finally found this thing to apply the glue. Hopefully you have one in your shop. If you don't, just go get one because it's better than using your finger. But anyways, back to the clamps. I needed to use one that's for the thicker side and one that's for the inside, and basically this worked out really well. Now an obvious alternative or addition to this method would be to use some strap clamps or even traditional clamps, adding some blocking on the outside corners, but for this project this is the way we chose to do it and it worked out well. And here I am applying the clamp to the thicker side, and then the other one I had set up for the rabbited side, so basically I just used 2 of these, one for each of the 2 frames that we built. I did add some tape to that corner to avoid any kind of issue. Overall, the 2 corner clamps worked out great. Now with everything glued up and set waiting to dry, I needed to move on to this faux grass backer material. Now the process of me doing this was sort of a little bit of from the hip. I don't have a ton of experience working with this sort of material, so what I did was I taped off the areas on the plywood backer boards where I didn't want this thing to stick. And then I used this Type-Bond multi-purpose sealant or adhesive to just smear this all over the plywood where I did want the material to stick. So again, tape where no stick, and the rest of this product just goes everywhere I want it to stick. So basically I peeled this off, and once I had the tape off, then I was able to just lay the square piece of the faux grass down onto it, and I repeated it with the second board so that I could stack them up together, lay some weights on it overnight, and just let this stuff dry. Going back to cut out those pieces later, doing it this way and leaving out where the adhesive goes actually made my life a whole lot easier, especially cutting out the interior, which is exactly what we needed to do next. So I did that by laying out the interior frame, and then I used my ruler to just measure out where I put the tape exactly, and then I used a razor knife to cut through the material, and guess what? The piece that I needed to come off came off nice and easy. There was a really thin bit of extra green material around the perimeter of the plywood that I also removed. It's where I left out some of the adhesive as well. I'll show that here in just a moment. But for the final sanding, I took everything down to 240 grit, and that's what I felt comfortable doing. So here when I move over to the plywood, I'm going to lift this up and show you the bottom side of it where you can see the leave out across the outside edge, and that is where the rabbited cut on the exterior plywood is going to sit. Now heading over to stain. This is our special walnut by Varathane. I like to apply my stain with a little piece of sponge. I know there's probably 50,000 different ways to do stain at this point. I've just been doing it this way for years and I really like it. I can get the stain on in a thick coat, and then the sponge itself actually helps me remove extra material as I go. I just find it helps keep everything kind of clean as I go with the stain. Now I didn't do 2 coats of stain on this. I just did 1 coat on the interior frame and on the exterior frame. Now we had to break back out the Type-On 3 because it's time to set that plywood base into the exterior frame. So you want to get a bunch of the glue into the outside edge of that rabbet cut, and then you're going to take the frame with the grass side facing down on your workbench, and you're going to press the frame into it. Now because of that leave out, it's going to allow you to get the frame to set nice and tight and flush, and you know that's the entire point of doing the rabbet cut, is to have the back inlaid in place like this. And then to glue in the interior frame, because I am trying to do everything without any fasteners, I just applied some glue around the inside of that little leave out, and then I took the actual frame piece and I just pressed it in place. I put a board across it and a weight, and I left it overnight. And then for the washers, we used a orange and blue color paint, just two opposing colors that I thought would look cool for the build. And then I also have a clear coat spray that I use for the washers, which you could, I guess, use to just spray over the outside of the frame as well. But what we chose to do was a Minwax polyacrylic, and this is a water-based, just a clear matte coat. So for the maple plywood, I didn't want to add any stain to that. I wanted there to be a nice contrast between the frame and the plywood base. And I just use a paintbrush to apply 2 coats of this stuff, and I do a light sand in between, and there you go. I'm calling this last section the bonus round because I could have just been finished where I was, but as I looked at the orange and the blue paint, it just sort of lingered in my mind, and I decided to sand off the face of the frame, and I wanted to do one side orange and one side blue, kind of like you have the orange and the blue washers, to just give the entire thing that extra bit of pop and color and detail. So you can see the washers were a little bit dinged up because we were already testing this out. And then I decided to come back and tape all of this off and add the color. Again, this is total bonus. If you wanted to add other accents, you absolutely could. But I think these 2 color additions really set this thing off and made it look awesome. Now, a couple of other additional items would be adding latches to either side of the frame and a handle to carry it around, as well as if you wanted to put some feet underneath it. These are all things that I picked up at Lowe's. Now, I did actually add the handles and the latches on the sides because I just thought it was really cool to be able to close the box up and keep the washers inside of it, and then you could just carry this thing around or take it to wherever you needed to go. So in order to do that, you can put your washers inside the center hole, lift one side over the other, and then latch both sides. And once it's latched in place, you can pick it up by the handle, and the whole thing stays together really well. Now, this being primarily made of oak and 1-inch thick oak on the outside frame, it is pretty heavy, but the handle works great. And that left us with nothing else to do other than take the set outside, let it get some sunshine to show those colors pop, and play a game. Now, you traditionally would set the 2 boxes 20 feet apart. I'll let you guys check online for all the rules to the game depending on how you'd like to play it, but I took this as an opportunity to teach my daughter how to play the washer game. Now, the scoring works by the inside square being a 3-point and the outside perimeter area being a 1 point, and then if you just totally miss everything, then you're at a 0 points. And you play from the same side. If you're just doing a one-on-one situation, you both stand next to the box and you throw your washers down to the other side. And my daughter caught on really fast here, and this kind of goes to show that this is a great game for the family, and I hope if you build one, you'd really enjoy it. And all right, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that it was at least inspiring to you, maybe to build one of these game sets for yourself, or maybe something similar. Again, don't forget to check down in the description if there's anything that you were trying to figure out from the video. If I don't have a link for something that you need, please reach out to me on social media at ToughGuysTV everywhere, or reach out to me here on YouTube. Thanks so much for checking out this project, and I hope to see you in the next video.